Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Last week, I had an interesting conversation with Michael F. Schein, who's on the podcast today. Welcome, Michael, to the show.
Hey, Joel. Hey, Antonia. It's great to be here.
Michael has just written a book at the time of this recording called The Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers. And as an ENFP personality type, when I saw that title, I went, oh my goodness, this is the handbook of my life. This looks fantastic. And I had the conversation with you last week, Michael, and I said, hey, would you be willing to come on the show and talk a little about your new book? And maybe a concept or two out of it we could unpack today on the show. And I thought that would be a good idea. So you're here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you coming from, Michael? What is your story?
So I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version if people still know what Cliff Notes are. But I own a marketing agency, or a hype agency, as I like to call it, and I'm a writer. But I never thought I would be in business. I wanted to do something artsy. I wanted to write novels and play in bands, and I did that. I after college played in a band, and even though I probably wasn't talented enough to make it big, we drummed up a lot of attention. We used to sell out clubs and get our name in the press a bunch. But I eventually had to get a job, and I was in the corporate world, for the better part of a decade. And then I left that and became a freelance copywriter. And I thought, because I was a good writer and people had always told me I was a good writer, that I would, just get clients and get customers. And that didn't happen. I almost burned through all my savings. And I tried to read every sales and marketing book that was out there. It did nothing for me. I was very bad at that, and ironically. And so then I thought back to my band days and how we used to pack clubs by doing kind of benevolent mischief, all kinds of antics to get ourselves, in the press, in the alternative papers, various places. And I started taking that approach. I thought about hip hop, where they always have a hype man who is kind of part of the group and gets the crowd worked up and sometimes manages the street teams. So I thought, what if I could hype myself up instead of marketing myself? And I did some of that, and we can talk about the details, but it was very successful. I started to get a lot of writing clients, and then people started to want the hype or the marketing, for their own businesses more than they wanted the writing. And it turned into a company. It turned into an agency where we work with idea-driven companies, a lot of consultants, some technology companies, and we find a niche and we turn them into the most visible players in that niche. And it's been a lot of fun. And now, most recently, I have a book out with McGraw-Hill, which is a whole lot of fun. I've come a bit full circle.
Yeah, you finally got to do the writing you were originally wanting to do.
Exactly.
So how do you define hype?
I'm well aware that for most people, the word hype is considered a negative. It's this idea of talking up something that doesn't have much to it. I see it differently. Maybe it's that I've taken it back and tried to repurpose it. But to me, hype is a completely amoral thing. It's neither moral nor immoral. All it is any activities that get a large number of people emotional in order to get them to take a certain action. So that can be used to get them to take a really negative action. It can be used to take them to get a very positive action, but there's no moral content to how I define the word.
So then hype is getting a large group of people all in the same emotion or approximation of an emotion in order to get them to do something.
Correct.
And I can hear your hesitancy about like the word hype and how people can misconstrue it, or at least always see it as maybe a weapon of evil as opposed to a tool that can be built. But as you describe it, it feels like everything runs on hype now.
A lot does. And in fact, that was one of the reasons that I wrote the book. So, I think that the reason that most people consider hype to be negative is not that it's negative in itself. It's that on average, and I stress on average, people who do some nefarious things take to it more naturally. And I really researched why that was. And they've done some studies on people with antisocial personality disorder. That's that sort of basket of disorders that includes sociopathy, psychopathy, sociopathy, extreme narcissism. And when those people engage in a very highly risky or emotionally provoking activity or state, their heart rate tends not to rise as much as the rest of us. So what that says to me is that those type of people sort of see the world as a chessboard. They see the world as a little more as it really is, rather than how the idealists among us wish it would be. So because so many hype artists are running the world right now, especially with the media apparatus we have, and because I see a lot of them doing not so great things, it became essential to me to put these strategies in the hands of the good guys and the good ladies, the people creating great businesses, creating great art, creating great political causes, because the bad guys already get it.
So then the challenge with most people creating hype is if our blood pressure rises with that, it means that on some level we perceive that there's risk for us individually involved if we try to create hype in a group. And you're saying that there's a certain percentage of people who they don't have as much skin in the game, like they don't experience the risk as much. Is that effectively what I'm hearing?
Risk is part of it. I would say the other part of it is just what we are taught to believe about how we exist in society. So I studied the pickup artist community as one of the groups that I looked at. And again, I am far from condoning these people's actions, right? However, they're a group of people who in the early 2000s became notorious and most notably documented in a book called The Game by Neil Strauss for scientifically disassembling what it takes to go into bars and seduce women. And there's a scene in the book, and most of the people who came to it were not naturally seductive people. So there's a scene in the book where this guy Mystery, who was like the primo pickup artist, says to all of the kind of nerds that he was going to turn into pickup artists, listen, when you implement the strategies that I give you, you're going to feel butterflies. You're going to feel maybe nauseous. You're not going to want to walk up to people. He said, come to see those things as a pebble in your shoe and do it anyway. So what is it about walking up to a woman in a bar that should bother people? Sure, it's risk, but it's also the fact that we'll be perceived a certain way by our community that's not sort of the middle of the road kind of good person. What if you're rejected in public? That's not real risk. It's not risk to your life, but it's risk to your status, right? So I think that there are standards that we've all sort of agreed make you a nice person. And some of them are in our own heads, but they create emotions in most of us. And they create the kind of emotions that keep us from engaging in those activities, I suppose.
So a part of it is when you're generating hype and you suddenly, like maybe you're doing it well, then there's this idea of like, well, now I'm in a different place in maybe this little miniature social ecosystem all the way up to a huge social ecosystem. Now I'm like maybe putting my head up, or maybe I'm like, entering a role that I'm not used to being in, and I feel hesitant about that. And am I allowed to do that? I think people ask the question, am I allowed to do this a lot? And so now you're like you're putting yourself in a completely new space. And oftentimes anytime we're doing anything well out of our comfort zone, it does feel super risky, but you're just saying it's also just different than what we're used to.
I think that's exactly right.
So Michael, basically when I hear this idea of hype, and you talked about emotionally connecting with people or getting people emotional in order to take an action, that resonates deeply with me. Like I said, this book kind of feels like an ENFP, survival manual or a manual of like kind of how my brain already thinks about stuff, because I have a fundamental belief that no one takes any action unless they're emotionally motivated to do so. Like, I can't logic anyone into doing something. I can't reason anyone into doing something. They have to have an emotional reason, emotional connection to do that thing. Even the most logical, reasoned people among us, I have a fundamental belief that they actually act upon emotion, not upon logic or reason. Now, they might use the logic and reason to justify or explain why they did what they did, but that emotional underpinning is like the basis of everything. And that's like a individual, but what you're talking about is this idea of being able to influence large amounts of people. And you even mentioned the media earlier. You said, our media machine today, or our media culture, you can see how much fear and anxiety and like you can see the emotional hype and manipulation of the headlines that come through our feed every day.
Divisiveness.
Oh, yeah.
My side, your side.
And I mean, the media's tapped into this. Politicians have tapped into this. Businesses are now starting to tap into this in a lot of ways. And I think that, interestingly, this manual is almost like it could be a manual in order to do it, but it's also a survival manual of like, make sure you know when it's happening to you kind of on the other side, right?
How are you getting jerked around?
Yeah, there is some of that for sure. But I do want to say that the jerked around part, like it's, put it this way. I've always been interested, at heart, I like to think of myself as still that artsy kid that I was years ago. And as a result, I often think in terms of the kind of media or art that kind of turned me on as I was growing up. And while some people, and I'm a big music fan, and a lot of people love music that's just sort of music. People get up there in jeans and strum guitars and sing well, and it's really nice. But I've always really preferred bands and music where the hype or the emotion was baked into the art. So like, I love David Bowie, right? And in his Ziggy Stardust phase, before he was famous in the United States, he would show up in a limousine and sort of like shield himself from view. And it created this thing where he was a star before he was a star. But that was really good for his career. But it was also part of the image of Ziggy Stardust, the world's last rock star. So was he jerking people around? No. I mean, that in fact helped the art. It helped the transcendence. So I think at its best, hype can add a lot of color to the world. It can add a lot of playfulness. That's why I call it benevolent mischief. Now, it can be used for evil, but it can be used for beyond just good. It can be used to make the world a more interesting place.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. So I'm going to go into a little bit of dissent now, Michael. And I'm not going to pick on you too much because I don't think it's to you.
Bring it on.
So there's this, you open the book with this idea, I think the chapter's called Make War, Not Love. and it's this idea that, and I've seen this like you mentioned hip hop or rap earlier. I've seen this in the rap world, and you even have your own story around this. I don't want to steal your thunder on your story, but
no.
So I grew up. I'm old enough that one of the like the musicians I listened to, the R&B or the rappers I used to listen to is Eminem. And in one of his most recent albums, he has this track that he's talking about how all these little guys coming up keep attacking him publicly to try to get attention from him, to get him to call them out in his music, basically. And that's a really brilliant strategy, right? If you can attack the big dog and they mention you, well, now you get attention, and that kind of can launch and move your career forward. You actually have a very similar story in your career path. Is that right?
I do. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're not a rapper, but you basically picked a fight in order to launch what you do with a prominent marketing person. And
I did, but I also really believed that the fight needed to be picked.
There you go. All right. So it was legit for you. You weren't doing it synthetically. It was something you actually believed. You weren't trying to create. You weren't doing what rappers do and just call each other out. I think that's a key thing I wanted to zoom in on is it was genuine for you. And by the way, you're probably bracing yourself because, okay, where's the dissent coming? Is he trapping me here? I'm not trying to trap you.
No. I mean, seriously, I'm a big fan of debating to learn. I think that's the way we clarify our ideas. So.
Yeah. The one thing that came up for me, because this inherently, like it makes so much sense to me. Like to get on somebody's radar, the picking the fight thing. The dissent I have, so I'm going to just go here so that way it can put you at ease and I'm not trying to trick you or trap you. The dissent I have is that I'm always also watching, okay, it worked. Like, it's not that it doesn't work, but sometimes I'm always concerned, like, to what end? Did I attract the wrong type of people with the energy I put out using this fight strategy? That's the one thing I'm always considering. And I'm still struggling with that. I actually don't know where I fall down on it because that's actually kind of wanted to bring it up. That's the dissent is I want to work this out with you. It's
a great point, and it's a nuance worth discussing. So I don't think it's even necessary to pick a fight with a person. I think you can pick a fight with an idea. So just to clarify sort of the point of that strategy and that principle, human beings, you can present something affirmatively to a human being, and they'll say, oh, that's a great idea. But for various reasons that we can discuss, some of them are neurological, we define ourselves much more readily and much more emotionally against other things than we do for other things. And it has a lot to do with how we evolved as a tribal species. So, for example, you don't have to pick a fight with a person just to ride on their coattails. That's one way of doing it, but that's almost like a more blunt way of doing it. So I'll give you an example from the business world. There's this company called Basecamp, which I'm sure some of your listeners know because they produce a project management software that's used a lot because it's very simple. So before they came along, the sort of MO for project management software was it had to have as much functionality as possible. So like if a client called you up and said, we needed to do this, we needed to do that, not only would you add it for them, but you would then add it to all subsequent versions, because why wouldn't you want, if you're using software to manage your complex projects, why wouldn't you want the software to do as much as possible for any potentially unforeseen circumstance? Now, these guys who started Basecamp came along with a software that they won't make changes for clients. If you need a more complex, ad hoc change, go to someone else. And it only does a handful of things. So it's notoriously stripped down and simple. Now, they could have just gone out and said, hey, our software is stripped down and it's simple, and that's why you should buy it, because you don't like complex things. And they would have gotten some buyers. But that's not what they did. They went on the warpath for this concept that the entire way that we work is too complex. So they have a book called Rework that's very popular in the business world. And they have like sayings in it, like fire your workaholics. It can wait till Monday. Over complexity is killing us. And they just kind of picked a fight with this hustle culture. I shouldn't say hustle culture, with this idea of under promise and over deliver. I work 6 hours a week. I remember a 40-hour week. Isn't that cute? You see that meme. And they picked a fight with that, not with any people, with the idea. And I think that's extremely positive. And they became very, very, very popular as a result. They're looked at as gurus, and their software just becomes the obvious way to solve that problem. So I think some fights need to be picked.
So just to make clear that, make sure that I and the listener are up to speed on the principle you're talking about.
Oh yeah, I jumped ahead, didn't I?
A little bit. Yeah. So when you say make war not peace, that's one of the hype rules or principles.
Make war not love.
Oh, sorry, make war not love. And so just to, is there anything about that idea that is beyond what you just mentioned? Because I think I kind of sussed out the principle or patterned what you guys were talking about, which is effectively that if you want to hype yourself up or if you want to get attention and emotionally or encourage groups of people to behave in an emotional way, you basically pick a fight with, like you just mentioned, either a person or an idea itself.
Yeah, and you can even if you want to expand that out, further, it's take contrarian stands,
Mm,
take bold points of view, right? I mean, don't constantly just be putting out there what you're for, but constantly be telling people what you're against.
right. And that actually makes me think of, I don't know if you've read the book Tribal Leadership by Dave Logan, but he talks about how some of the happiest workplaces are people who collectively together in that workplace have a lot of camaraderie, and oftentimes they either pick a fight with a competing company, so they're all like in this together as a team against this other company that may be doing the same thing that they're doing, like Pixar and DreamWorks, or they pick a fight against a challenge in and of itself. Like sometimes, in the same concept of animation, instead of picking a fight with Pixar or DreamWorks, they'll pick a fight with like hair, right? Because hair is like notoriously difficult to animate.
Right.
And so it's this idea of like, there's an enemy out there and we've all got to kind of band together to fight that enemy.
I love that. I should read that book. I mean, it's funny, right? Like we all inherently hate the idea of I probably get more pushback to this thing than any other principle in the book, because people don't like to think of themselves as being adversarial for the sake of being adversarial. We all want to be perceived as good and nice and kind, which for good reason. However, a lot of us love sports, and we see and forget about watching the games, but we watch these documentaries about these teams, the miracle team against the Soviets, who just bonded so deeply, and they did it against another team. And we love those stories. We don't see anything negative. We see it as a positive. Those people get motivational talks at corporations.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We should question our assumptions about some of these things, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that actually.
Well, we see if you can see life as a game, then it lessens the severity and seriousness of all of it, right? It's like when we take ourselves so serious. Games are by definition games, so we suspend disbelief for them.
Well,
Right.
and competition is how we become better as individuals, and we love stories of overcoming, right?
Exactly.
There is probably not enough time to go through every single part of this book. So if you're listening right now and you want to learn more about what Michael wrote here, obviously you need to pick up a copy of the Hype Handbook. But I do want to move over to another chapter where the title is called Make It Scientific. And you kind of talk about this principle of when you're motivating people or getting people hyped up about something, one of the things that can work well, and from my understanding of it, is you can add in elements that are, and I think the reason why I bring this up is relevant to what we do here. You bring in elements of I don't want to call it pseudoscience because it's not, it's genuine, maybe scientific things or other markers of that. But you really try to amp those things up. And in our world, the Myers-Briggs world, for example, personality type, it's not really recognized by the psychology industry or, circles of decent people that are academics in the higher echelons don't always recognize this. Some do, but often it's kind of the bastard child of the psychology world.
We're totally the bastard love child of psychology.
So one of the things that I think a lot of people in typology do is they try to find, like some proof of like, hey, look, there's scientific here. And we have a friend of ours and colleague and somebody we've done work with, Dr. Dario Nardi, who has a book called The Neuroscience of Personality. So we often will reference his work. He does brain scanning imagery and looks at personality types, how they show up in brain scans. There's other people doing work like that. So we always are referencing things like that to give it legitimacy, because we believe, subjectively, we believe this makes sense to us. But objectively, we can't really say it does. We can't be like, this is complete truth. But there's a resonance of truth there. So we look for scientific things to help, make a case for it. And in that same vein, I think there's this part of the typology world where everyone's on a hunt to make a better assessment to determine your type and make it more objective, more accurate. If you go to different websites, they'll talk about, how accurate their test is or things like this. And there's a lot of language that I think builds upon this principle, at least as far as I can understand it, trying to weave in these elements to support something that may be a little bit more esoteric. So maybe, am I understanding this concept properly from your book, how I read it? And is there any more nuance you could add to what I'm understanding from it or not understanding from it?
Yeah, I think you're understanding it well. So it's really interesting to understand or important to understand that the human brain, even though it's our only access to the world outside of us, is not designed to see the world as it really is. It is designed to give us a clear enough version of the world to allow us to survive and hopefully spread our genes at some point in the way. So those are the brains that survive. So, for example, we're being bombarded with huge amounts of information all day long. So if you had to do a complete assessment and background check every time you met an individual, you wouldn't be able to move. You would be paralyzed. So we use heuristics, which are mental shortcuts, to make decisions based on our environment, based on our experience, mental shortcuts to decide who to trust, what to do. So an example is, in the olden days, all doctors wore white coats, right? And the reason they did that was not, what's the real reason for that? No reason, except for the fact that it helps show that they're doctors. And some nefarious individuals used to use that. Some quack doctors would wear white coats to make themselves seem better than they were, because people automatically trust that. So Gotcha. The idea here is not to lie about scientific knowledge. It's to help people understand what might be common sense ideas, or beneficial ideas when presented differently. So let's talk about Myers-Briggs for a second. So, there have been people giving advice based on personality types in an informal way forever. You would walk into a bar and the bartender would get to know you and say, you just want to make the world a better place and you're so chatty. I think you should do this and this. And you would say, awesome. That's such good advice. But the person was still a bartender. They weren't starting a company based on advice, right? So Myers-Briggs is basically taking a lot of what people have known for years and putting letters and types and external signifiers that lets you say, I can actually feel that an authority was behind this to make a decision that I can trust around this. And for better or worse, people will just pay money, pay attention, part with resources for the same knowledge packaged with these external signifiers of authority. Now, in the past, those may have been animal entrails and tea leaves, but we live in a scientific society now. So usually the signifiers of expertise are scientific in nature.
Yes. And I think that as our world, this also expands just from being able to influence with hype, being able to influence and motivate people, using this concept of hype for good. Also, we're losing those markers in our society as a whole. Like, our institutions seem to be going much more postmodern and breaking down.
Yeah.
We're losing the traditional markers of religion, politics, structure. Things are more globalized, technology's on the rise. People are losing a sense of these markers. And so when we communicate with people, they're probably even more useful or more helpful for people to have access points to see, okay, this is something I can trust, because we're having to make decisions so quickly, like you said. And every day, more information is just flooding us. It's not getting less, it's getting more. So we have to find even more markers. And, on a really bad side, like a real bad marker is like a tribal, mindset or something we group ourselves in as a marker of okay, they're all kind of believe like I believe. That's the right way to think then.
I think that's true.
But we could find better ways, I think. I think this just gave me the idea that we have these better ways of finding markers to help people have access points to better thinking. And I don't exactly have the complete thought, but this is something that's been stimulated in my mind to be thinking about going forward on how can we give those markers. And I noticed I'll just bring it back down to the type world. When a group of individuals or an individual is attempting to create a new typology assessment or system, I've noticed that they really double down on the scientific, objective elements of things. They really try to add that in, especially they front load it up front to try to get it, and I see why they're doing it, because it helps give that access point for people to be able to trust in it. Whereas Myers-Briggs itself's been around for almost 100, since the 40s, right? So 80 years or so. Yeah. So it's kind of it's not necessarily fully trusted, but it has a marker element of that. There's generations of people. It's been in the public consciousness long enough. But if someone added
it's pretty well trusted. I
Yeah.
mean, there are a lot of clinical psychologists and research psychologists who have cast doubt on it. But if you go to some of the biggest corporations in the world, I mean, McKinsey uses it. And you could show the psychological research to them that maybe it isn't 100%, or I don't know, that it has its flaws. However, we don't need to go into that here because I don't know enough really about what those flaws may or may not be. But McKinsey, which is $1 billion company, doesn't care.
Yeah.
Because it's a marker that they can use.
Absolutely. So obviously you write a book for I know we need to start wrapping it up here because we have our next things to go to, but you write a book obviously because we've written a book too. There's multiple reasons. I mean, one is to have something for your business. That's what we did. We wanted to make sure we had a calling card for our business. We also wanted to communicate the information, but then there's usually like a goal below that of like a wish that we wish we could send this letter in the world, like this letter, this bound letter that's time bound, that's going to be your legacy, Michael, into the world for a reason. And what would your wish be? Like this letter that you've bound, this book you've created, that you've sent into the world that's going to be your legacy long after you're gone. What is your hope for this? What do you hope people get from this? What's the thing that you really want to communicate with the thing you've written?
So at the risk of alienating part of this audience, I'm going to answer that by telling a story.
Sure.
I came up with the idea for this book. They were ideas I had been playing with for a long time, but I finally came up with the idea of this book. I was on a business trip and it was one of the first presidential primary debates, Trump. And I had this other book with me called The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, which is this book from 1895, written by the first acknowledged crowd psychologist who had seen the Paris Commune, which was basically this mob of people burning Paris to the ground for no real reason by the end. And he didn't understand how that happened. So he decided to spend his life dissecting why crowds behave the way that they do. And so I read strange books like this. So I was kind of simultaneously flipping through this book and watching this debate. And the book said things like, now again, this is 1895. It said things like, crowds respond to external signifiers of prestige. When there is no prestige, money will do. Crowds, what did he say? Crowds, like vague future-focused language that they can put their own meaning into. And I was watching this debate and everyone thought he was a joke. And I was like, this guy could win. And none of my friends believed me. And then he did win. So I guess what frustrates me is that there are people who I feel make the world a worse place, who just get this stuff and they do it. And if you understand the mechanisms, it is so easy to see what they're doing, but it works time and time again. And there are people out there just doing such great work and making the world such a better place. And they're so reluctant to see the world the way it really is and what people really respond to. And I guess my wish for this book is that I make the case that it's your moral imperative, if you have a great idea that can make the world a better place, to get people to buy into those ideas and get excited about those ideas based on what we know about mass psychology. And then it's my wish that once they buy into that concept, that the best people among us learn how to do it so that we have more good ideas getting traction and helpful ideas than all the garbage that's out there that's hurting us.
Right answer, Michael F. Schein. I mean, I don't know if it was the right answer, but it was a good answer. I like that answer. I think that's a great reason.
It's very heartfelt. I mean, that's where it comes from.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
And
I had an absolute blast. This was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I'm liking getting to know you more. And if you have resonated with some of the things that Michael and we have been talking about on here, you can pick up a copy of the Hype Handbook on probably any major retailer. It's by McGraw-Hill, so I'm guessing it's on Amazon, online retailers. If bookstores are open in your area, feel free to go into an actual physical bookstore, local bookstore, and order a copy through them and support local bookstores. That'd be an awesome thing to do. So thanks, Michael, again for being on the show with us.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And we'll have a link, of course, below this podcast. But if you want to look up Michael's book, his last name is spelled S-C-H-E-I-N. It's pronounced Schein, but it's S-C-H-E-I-N. And the book, again, is the Hype Handbook.
By Michael F. Schein. And if you've been listening along and you want to make your voice heard as part of this conversation, we'd love to invite you to come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, you can ask a question, leave your feedback, make a comment, or more importantly, share your story.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. I'm going to recommend you go check out Michael's book, The Hype Handbook. And as mentioned, you can get it at all major book retailers. And if you're looking for a personal growth program tailored for your personality type, you can go to personalityhacker.com, and our catalog of programs might have something that's right for you. So go check them out.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.